Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. That is a quote by Elon Musk. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Finding Your Feet After Failure. And my guest today is a remarkable woman, and I'm sure you're going to really enjoy our discussion. I would love to welcome Lois Strachan. Hi, Lois.
Hi there, Lois. It always feels unusual having two Loises on a call. It doesn't happen very often, but it's always a lot of fun when we do this.
I still can't get used to having to say my name to somebody else.
Well, at least we know how to pronounce it, which is more than sometimes happens.
That is so true. So when Lois Strachan became blind at the age of 21, she learned fast that resilience and the ability to solve problems were an essential part of life. As a disability coach, she uses this understanding to help others from the disability community to move forward and achieve their goals. Lois is a best-selling author, a speaker, and the host of the A Different Way of Seeing podcast. She uses her platform to raise awareness of the tools and techniques that allow people with disabilities to succeed in all aspects of life. Wow, that is wonderful, the work that you do, Lois.
I'm very passionate about it. I think it's so often people underestimate the abilities of those of us in the disability community, and we get marginalized and not really included and pushed aside. And, it's important to have positive voices out there who are helping people, supporting, and helping people to realize that their dreams are attainable, despite a disability. Yeah.
Fantastic. So tell me a little bit about your podcast.
The podcast started, gosh, it must be almost going on 6 years now. And while I started out, um, working mostly with accessible travel, which is travel, people with disabilities. And I was interviewing people who had traveled globally and done amazing things in the tourism world and experiences, tourist experiences that are inclusive for all people. Eventually, I decided that I wanted to shift the brand a little bit closer to the work that I'm more generally doing. So I'm not excluding travel in what I'm talking about on the show, but we also talk to people about more general topics around disability. And I talk to people from with a different ages, different cultures, different spectrums of disability, different abilities, and different topics. And I love the fact of hearing other people's stories, getting them the opportunity to share their stories and talk about some of the things that people are doing. And I think ultimately the reason that I love the work that I'm doing with the podcast is that all too often people see disability as being either an inspiration or a triumph, or they see it as a tragedy. And the reality is that most of us are just trying to live normal lives like everybody else. It's just that the tools and the techniques that we use are different. So it's really about exploring all of those topics on the show with the guests that I have.
If your life is normal, because because you do some extraordinary things, some of the travel you're doing, and I think I read or heard somewhere you did a Harley Davidson trip around the Cape, Harley Davidson. It sounds like you do more than the average person.
I have had the opportunity of really doing some amazing things. And they're not world changing, but they're often fun things that I decide to try. And often it's just to push my own boundaries and to see what is possible. So that motorbike journey wasn't a Harley Davidson, sadly, but it
Right.
was a motorbike from the Second World War era.
Oh, wow.
And it was a lot of fun. We went between Hout Bay and Noordhoek, I think, and then back again, a group of us, all part of a animal rescue shelter as one of their fundraisers. It was so much fun. And they were all motorbikes with sidecars. And I decided I wasn't going to go the safe route in the sidecar. I wanted to sit on the back of the bike. And it was an amazing experience.
Oh, I'm sure I would love to do that myself. Lois, can you share with us, please, a small failure or mistake or adversity that you have faced? Something small, nothing too huge.
Lois, I was thinking about this one, and there are so many different little failures, different adversities, different little things that I counter almost every day. But it's not so much about failing and feeling bad about it. I take failure as a sign of I'm exploring new things. I am trying new ideas and I'm figuring things out. So I've kind of got a different experience. Well, maybe not. I think many people will share the what I'm going to say about seeing that word of failure. There are all sorts of things that I've tried and that haven't worked. And in every aspect of my life. I mean, like the first time I tried baking a lasagna, I no one had ever taught me how to make a lasagna, and I had no idea that you needed a fair amount of liquid to cook the pasta. So I just did what I thought it should be like, and instead landed up with a very crunchy lasagna. All the time recording one of my podcast episodes that, guess what? I forgot to hit the record button and had to go through to the guest and say, excuse me, I'm really sorry. Do you mind if we redo that? So those are all opportunities for learning. The opportunities to discover things that have happened that maybe I've tried doing them and it hasn't been the right way. So yeah, it's not failing and seeing it as a bad thing. It's seeing it as an opportunity to learn and grow and move forwards.
Well, I hope when I meet up with you, you'll make me a lasagna that is not crunchy.
I'll do my best.
And and I think what you've just said is so important. You know, you forgot to record, you had to go back to the guest. And the first thing you said was, I am sorry. So that apology is such an important part of overcoming a mishap.
Yes, I acknowledging that, oops, that wasn't the way it was meant to be. And if you can't acknowledge it, then there's just what's going to stop you doing the same thing again? Wasn't there someone who said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing X number of times and expecting a different outcome? So it's very much about testing, trying, exploring, and innovating.
Right. So that brings me to your wonderful quote that you said. If it doesn't work, innovate.
Absolutely. It's something that I really strongly believe. It kind of goes right up there with the saying, if at first you fail, well, dot dot dot. It's a lot around those ideas. It's the idea that, as I said, it's okay not to get things right the first time. That's how we learn. It's having the courage, the resilience, well, the courage to go out and try something new anyway, and the resilience that if it doesn't work, not to see yourself as being a failure, as not being good enough, just realizing that something different might be a better option. And I really do find that playing out in my life time after time after time. And it's a good life lesson for me, I think.
So, using that example you gave us that you forgot to press the record button, how can you innovate to prevent that happening again?
It's mostly in that case, I mean, it's not really an innovation about doing something different, except I'm a lot better now at double checking that everything is working. I think the innovation in that particular example came in with changing some of the processes that I used. I wasn't using a particularly friendly piece of software to record at that time, where now the way I'm recording, I have a lot more control, and it's a lot easier for me to check that what I'm doing, I can check that it's recording. So it was about exploring different ways of doing what I was doing to find a better way. And yeah, I think it's very much about understanding that there's very seldom only one way to do any task. And I in my speeches, I'm starting to find that the message of different does not mean inferior. Different only means different. That is really starting to resonate with me and with my audiences as well.
So, to be different and to innovate, how can people learn to be different and to innovate?
I think the first step is to understand that life is a learning experience, that if you just shift the mindset to understand that there are multiple ways of doing things, and that just because you've always done something one way doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way. It might be the best way for you right then, but life is also about change. And as things change, sometimes the processes we use, the way we do things, the approaches that we use also have to change. Um, so I think the first thing it's starting off is just to understand that change is not necessarily a bad thing, that being open to doing things a different way can result in a better way, an easier way, a
How
better,
do
more time productive way.
So how do we motivate people to attempt a new way, to change, to go in a new direction? I'm comfortable in my way.
Hmm.
Yes, it's not working as it should do, but hey, it's who I am and it's the way I do things. How can you get me to change that mindset?
I think that often it will come down to showing someone, demonstrating that there might be a better way, that it's in their interests to try something different. I mean, obviously, we get really entrenched in the way we do things. It's very easy to just say, I do it this way because that's the way I've always done it, or I do it this way because that's the way my mother did it. My grandfather did it. My, my teachers did it. It really depends. It is hard to shift the way we do things, but maybe showing that the value, the benefit. People don't do things just because, yeah, they need to be shown a reason of why they should try something different. And I think that that's a really big thing. It comes down to showing people the benefit they can have to try something in a new way, to look at something a little bit differently, and to just explore a little more.
So give me an example of where you've explored and innovated.
Um, well, I I am someone who has always, well, over the last 27 years or so, has been partnered with a guide dog. And then well, three different guide dogs, obviously. They don't sadly live that long. But in October last year, my guide dog unfortunately fell ill and passed away unexpectedly. And I know, I know that I have never been all that good at navigating around my world using a white cane. And I'm not saying that a white cane is not as good as a guide dog, it's just different. And I had to figure out the the adjustments to the way I was working. And just to give you a very specific example of that, I've been walking a route with my guide dogs for the last 20 years or so. I've never walked that with a cane. And I eventually got up the courage to say, this is silly. I know I need to become more independent using my cane. I know it's just about practice. It's just about convincing myself that this is doable. And I decided to walk part of that route. And I discovered a whole bunch of different things. So the first thing I discovered was part of my anxiety around using a white cane was that the cane that I was using did not give me sufficient warning of things that were approaching me or obstacles that were in my way. So I decided to try a longer white cane, which gave me essentially one more steps warning. So that was a form of innovating. It goes against the standard belief of how long your white cane should be, because mine is now up to my chin or just above that, where typically a mobility instructor will tell you that it should only take you up to your sternum. But that didn't work for me, so I tried something different. The other thing that I realized very quickly when I was doing this is that when you're working with a guide dog, the dog is trained to avoid obstacles. And because I'd got so used to working with my dogs, that was what I believed was the intention, the aim, the gold standard was to avoid all obstacles. But when you're working with a white cane, you actually need to encounter those obstacles. And just in thinking that differently and realizing that really got me to shift how independent and how capable I became using my white cane, because it suddenly sunk in. Oh, if I do it and think about it in this different way, it makes me more successful. So I think that's a very specific example of realizing the need to shift my thinking, shift my perspective, shift my techniques, all of those coming into that term innovate.
So it might not be a failure, but did you have any accidents walking with your white cane?
You mean apart from the tree that I walked into? I have never had okay, not so far. Have I had a bad accident with a white cane? Um, I have bent my white cane under a bus. That was when I
Okay.
was first training. Um, so I learned a couple of things there. Um, I've got lost using my white cane, and each time I have been in that situation, I've had to figure out a solution. And luckily, because I've always loved puzzles and problem solving, I've been able to find those solutions, be it approaching the problem differently, using a different technology, even just reaching out and asking for help. So, yeah, no major problems, but little instances, experiences, I guess.
That's a nice way of saying, using, instead of saying a failure, I had an experience.
Everything's an experience. Everything depends on the way we respond to it. Um, and we have a choice of how we respond to things. So it's very much about deciding to see it from a more positive stance rather than a blame stance, either blaming oneself or the situation or someone else. It's about what? Self-leadership, um, accountability.
How do we teach people to have that self-leadership and that accountability?
To essentially by empowering people to understand that trying and not succeeding is not failure, that it's merely a step on the journey. Because I think the concept of blame is really negative, and it's one that it's very easy to do. Something goes wrong. Who are we going to blame? What are we going to blame? But what does it actually solve to blame something, someone, even when it's yourself? It doesn't serve anything. And so instead, we can shift to it and saying, that's an opportunity for learning. It's an opportunity to try something different. And trying something different can be fun. I think
Are
that
we
might,
teaching these things to our school children? Are parents teaching their children this? Are teachers showing the way for how to overcome obstacles?
oh, that is such a complicated one to answer because my brain goes straight to no, because we are marked at school. We are told things are right or they are wrong. And if they are wrong, we got it wrong. A parent, and obviously that's going to depend on the authority figure, and the way they deal with something. I think that there is the opportunity, and okay, I'm not a parent. I am not a teacher. And I understand that there are complexities around, well, yeah, complexities around teaching right from wrong. But I think maybe there's something there around helping someone when they're younger to understand that, hey, it didn't work. That's okay. Just try something different.
I think that's a great opportunity to get parents and teachers to do that, move away from the pass and fail situation. It's you're not there yet. Add the yet to any kind of failure. You have not
Yeah.
passed yet.
I mean, the whole concept of failure has it's seen in such a negative light and it's framed in that way. And do we gain that by osmosis? Do we gain that through watching what our parents, our teachers, our grandparents do? It's hard to know. Um, I say for myself that I think my inherent love of puzzles has been something that has really benefited me through my life because it does help me to go, I like solving this. Okay, it's a problem. How do I solve it? What are my solutions? And sometimes even just shifting the questions that we ask ourselves. And I often say to people that, it's when we are going to try something different, we're a little bit anxious, try something new, but we know we have to do it. Rather than asking the question, can I do it? To which the brain starts going, oh, I don't know. Oh, I don't know if I can do it. Oh, I probably can't. Oh, it might be hard. It might be difficult. If we ask ourselves, how can I do it? Then we start looking for solutions. We start looking at the tools and techniques, the knowledge, the resources that we need to help us to do something a little bit different. And that for me has also worked very strongly as a technique through the years.
Sure, there's so much to unpack in all of that. There's so much learning. You know what I've found, especially since I started this channel, Finding Your Feet After
Mm.
Failure, is that people don't want to admit that they've made a mistake. What do you think the reason for that is? Why do people not want to say, oops, sorry, I made a mistake?
I think we are our own worst critics, and I think we judge ourselves at a very high standard. I think we don't like to be seen as making mistakes, about being vulnerable. We feel perhaps that it makes us look inferior or weak or incapable. And it is a hard mental jump to make to accepting that it's just part of life. Everybody is going to try something sometime that is not going to work. In fact, multiple times, not just once in their life, but multiple times. And if we are judging ourselves too harshly, we're the only ones who are going to suffer. Um, and I think that maybe it's something around that kind of point that we don't like to not live up to our own standards of ourselves, our own expectations.
I find it's quite difficult to get people to talk about their mistakes. I'm pretty out there and I share all my mishaps and my mayhem quite vulnerably. And so I find it quite sad that other people are not prepared to say, well, this is what happened. I fell off, but I got back up and I learned and I'm now better for it. And I really want to encourage people to do that.
I think so. I mean, I think we possibly do share a little more openly with the people who are close to us. Um, I think for me, it's more around the fact that people so often blame themselves or others for something going wrong, and they don't like to admit that they are to blame. again, it comes back to that word accountability. But if you can just accept that it's just a part of life and you just pick yourself up, dust yourself up, and on you go. And you learn from that experience.
As long as we learn from that experience, and as you said
Yeah.
before, don't make the same mistake.
Yeah. And if you make the same mistake twice, that's okay. Sometimes that path is a little bit longer to learn. But ultimately, if you're still making it 20 times down the track, you really may need to think about a new way of doing it.
So how many times is acceptable? How many mistakes, same mistakes can you make before you seem to be banging your head against a brick wall?
Oh, I think that's going to be a personal question of whatever finds each person or whatever brings them to reach that tipping point of going, this is ridiculous. The only one who can do something about this is me. And what do I need to change? And sometimes it takes longer. Some people do it faster. Some people do it take longer. And that's okay. It's more the the shifting process that can happen. And the more you do it, I think the easier it gets.
So what are one or two tips you can give somebody who has now made a big oopsie? They've made a big mistake. What tip could you give them, or a couple of tips to help them overcome that?
I would say, firstly, not to beat yourself up about what happened, to learn from it and to figure out how to prevent it happening again, and to forgive yourself, to be gentle with yourself and say, hey, yes, it happened, but I can make certain it doesn't happen again.
Fabulous. No, it's just on a different topic altogether. You wrote that lovely book about your dog Fiji. You want to
Mhm.
just share a little bit about that with our audience?
So, Fiji was my third guide dog. I worked with her from 2016 till late in 2023. And from quite early on, I thought it'd be quite fun to write on my blog, my Beyond Sight blog, stories from her perspective. And I started developing the Pause for Thought blogs. And I was looking for a writing project. I had written my memoir and really enjoyed that process. And I'd fallen in love with the concept of writing. And I thought, well, why not publish a collection of Fiji's blogs? And then the project kind of grew a bit and got a little bit more complicated, a little bit more broader. And it landed up being a book that details Fiji's working life from the time she was born through to the time, well, it landed up, the first edition landed up going on till the end of 2020. And then I decided if I carried on adding to it and adding to it, I would never get it out. So I had to draw a line somewhere and published the book. And now, in fact, it's currently July 2024, and I'm in process of reworking the book slightly, and I've completed it by adding the rest of her blog posts and completing the story of my dog, my beautiful girl who passed away in October last year. So I'm still working on that. I'm not certain exactly when the second edition is going to come out, but I'm hoping it'll be in the next 2 months or so. It's still
Well,
named Pause for Thought, Seeing the World Through the Eyes of a Guide Dog. And it's essentially about seeing the world in which we live, but from the perspective of a guide dog.
And did Fiji make any failures?
Oh, my dog. You know, they are just dogs beyond, they're very well trained. They're very great at what they do, but they do have their own personalities and their own areas that maybe they're not so strong. So the two that I can think of, well, Fiji's pet peeve was squirrels. And she was constantly trying to chase squirrels, although she did really manage to restrain that. There was once that she jumped into the lake close to our home and decided to swim after the ducks, only to get closer to them. They kept drifting off further away. And then she turned around and realized how far away she was, only to find that my husband was swimming after her to bring her back safely, because it would have probably been a bit far for her to swim back on her own. We just didn't want to take that risk. Then there was also a time that she and I managed between us to get lost because we took a shortcut on a route, and I panicked. So I'm not certain whether that was a failure on her part or on my part. But we did it differently ever since then. Um, yeah, so there's little things, nothing unavoidable, nothing irretrievable, but no one's perfect. And I can't expect myself to be perfect, and I couldn't expect my dog to be perfect. But she was an exceptional guide dog.
Well, I certainly recommend everybody look out for the second edition. The first edition was delightful.
Oh, thank you, Lois.
Lois, any last words of advice for anybody who's facing a roadblock?
I think, as I said, no, if you believe that there is a solution, then you will find it easier to find one, to be willing to innovate, to try something different. And if at first you don't succeed, well, innovate, try something different.
Fabulous. How can people reach you, Lois?
Best way to get hold of me is on my website, which is loisstrachan.com. We'll put that in the show notes, or would you like me to spell it?
Now, I'll put it into the description below.
Great, that's perfect. And most of my social media links are there. My blog is there, my podcast is there, my books are there, the work that I do, it's all on the website. So loisstrachan.com is probably the first port of call.
Great, fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Lois. There's a lot of thought going into this. We all need to learn to innovate and try something new, do something differently, and certainly just pick yourself up after you've had that roadblock. So
Absolutely.
thank you. So everybody, if you would like to have a free 30-minute discussion with me on your first steps to take after failure, please contact me. The link is in the description below. And please do go and look at some of the other interviews, subscribe, watch some of the other playlists. There's a whole bunch on me making my mistakes, my mission mojo, my mishaps, mayhem, mistakes, and misadventures. And there's a lot about overcoming failure on my channel. So please do subscribe and do go and look at the various videos. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Lois.